This is the story of Manuel Bartlett Díaz, the man they call the boss of all bosses, the shadow in the corridors of power that no one dares confront. The CIA avoids him. Every cartel leader, from El Chapo to El Mayo, whispers his name in caution. All cartel bosses fear him. There's a good chance you have never heard of him, and that's by design, because in Mexico some names are too dangerous to speak aloud. Only one man has ever dared to pull back the curtain to expose who is the untouchable boss of all the cartels is. That man is Hector Barrales, the DEA agent who uncovered the secret strings behind the Guadalajara cartel. According to Barrales, Bartlett Díaz isn't just influential. He is the architect, the brain, the untouchable force that orchestrated decades of cartel empires from the shadows. And yet, despite every kingpin captured, every empire toppled, he remains beyond reach, untouchable, and avoided by the very agencies that brought down everyone else.
So Fonseca drives from his house to the location where Kiki is being, and he orders Caro Quintero not to kill him. He says, "Don't kill him. That was not the plan." He says, "Don't kill him. That was not the plan. We're not supposed to guy." And he said, "I have orders from Manuel Bartlett Díaz, the Secretary of Government, that he Manuel Bartlett Díaz, the Secretary of Government."
February 7th, 1985, began in Guadalajara, Jalisco, as another ordinary day in the life of Enrique Kiki Camarena Salazar. Around midday, the 37-year-old DEA agent left the U.S. consulate on Avenida Progreso, his briefcase in hand and mind on a lunch with his wife, Mica. Walking briskly through the Colonia Jardines Alcalá neighborhood, he passed street vendors, pedestrians, and traffic, unaware that 5 armed men waited nearby, positioned with surgical precision. One man flashed a police badge, another leveled a pistol. Camarena barely had time to react before they shoved him into a beige Volkswagen Atlantic. The vehicle lurched forward, weaving through Guadalajara's streets, and within minutes, the DEA agent disappeared from sight. Witnesses would later describe the abduction as unnervingly professional. No struggle, no hesitation, executed in broad daylight with precision only experienced operators could muster. The car traveled west through the upscale Jardines del Bosque neighborhood, coming to rest at 8081 Lope de Vega, a salmon-colored house behind high walls and barred windows owned by Rafael Caro Quintero, the 32-year-old Sinaloan marijuana baron whose empire stretched across Mexico and into the United States. Inside, Camarena was blindfolded, stripped, and bound with curtain cords. His entry into the house marked the start of an ordeal that would shock the world and forever alter the DEA's operations in Mexico. The kidnapping of Kiki Camarena marked the spark that ignited the most incredible criminal empire in human history, setting in motion a chain of events that would redefine drug cartels across Mexico. This single act paved the way for notorious figures like El Chapo and El Mayo and laid the foundation for the rise of the most brutal organizations, including the Sinaloa Cartel, the Zetas, and the CJNG. Behind it all, one unseen boss operated in the shadows, so untouchable that for over 40 years, no agency has dared speak his name. Before we get deep into the story, please, take a minute to support this channel with a thumbs up and subscribe. Once inside the house, Camarena was dragged to a back room and forced to sit in a chair while a tape recorder began recording the interrogation. Voices barked questions about names, addresses, informants, and DEA operations. At first, he resisted. His captors responded with escalating violence. Amphetamines were injected to keep him conscious, fists and pipes beat his body, irons seared his chest and legs, and his ribs, fingers, and toes were crushed. In a particularly gruesome act, a power drill was applied to his skull. For 30 hours, his screams alternated with the muffled voices of his interrogators. That same afternoon, Alfredo Zavala Avalar, Camarena's pilot and informant, arrived separately at the house. He suffered the same fate in a different room. Both men became witnesses not only to torture, but to the operational structure that underpinned cartel violence and the CIA connection. During the brutal 30-hour interrogation at 8081 Lope de Vega in Guadalajara, Kiki Camarena's captors repeatedly injected him with adrenaline to counteract shock and keep him conscious and alive, as they sought to extract every detail about his investigations into the Guadalajara cartel's operations and protected shipments, ensuring he didn't die prematurely before revealing his informants and discoveries. This method was significant because it allowed the torturers, allegedly directed by CIA operatives who were present in the room, to prolong the session and uncover Camarena's groundbreaking findings as the first U.S. law enforcement officer to expose the cartel's ties to CIA-funded Contra operations.
Heads of cartels, CIA, DFS, all in the same room while this DEA agent was getting kidnapped and killed, all working together?
Yes, sir.
Camarena's real adversaries were not just the cartel bosses, but the CIA, who reportedly called the shots on his torture to protect their covert alliances, as later revealed by former DEA agent Hector Barrales, who investigated the case and confirmed CIA assets like Félix Rodriguez were in the interrogation room grilling Camarena about what he knew. The final authorization for his execution came from a boss who everyone feared talking about. This man was the critical link between the CIA and the cartel, who sat in his government office in Mexico City monitoring the situation. Meanwhile, Rafael Caro Quintero, who was one of the three dons of the cartel at that time, paced the house as if awaiting orders. He was the most heat-headed don, known to be volatile and feared. He had a personal vendetta. Months earlier, DEA agents had tipped Mexican authorities to the existence of Rancho El Bufalo, Caro Quintero's massive marijuana plantation in Chihuahua. In November 1984, the property was raided and destroyed, costing the cartel billions in lost inventory. Caro Quintero blamed Camarena personally, but even Quintero must not act without permission from the boss who must not be named. During the interrogation, Caro Quintero stepped out to take a phone call. According to former DEA agent Hector Barrales, the conversation carried orders from higher up. Finish it. Camarena knows too much. The instructions allegedly came from a circle of powerful officials in Mexico City, giving cartel bosses unprecedented license. Camarena was not only a threat to cartel plantations, but to shipments protected by political ties and covert international operations. By the morning of February 9th, Camarena succumbed. A final blow from an iron bar crushed his skull. Zavala followed soon after. Both bodies were wrapped in plastic and buried shallowly near Langostura, Michoacán. Ranchers discovered the remains on March 5, 1985. Dental records and identifying wounds confirmed the identities, but the brutality left an indelible mark on law enforcement communities. When news reached Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo that Enrique Kiki Camarena had been tortured and killed, he flew into a rage, confronting Rafael Caro Quintero in a furious meltdown and even pointing a gun at him, demanding to know why he would dare assassinate a top U.S. official and risk destroying everything they had built. Caro Quintero, facing the barrel, calmly revealed that he had not acted alone. The order to end Camarena came directly from the true boss of all bosses, the shadowy puppeteer who had set up and granted clearance to the three regarded founders of Mexico's modern drug cartels: Félix Gallardo himself, Caro Quintero, and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, known as Don Neto. In that moment, Félix Gallardo's anger turned to dismay as realization sank in. He understood that crossing this untouchable figure in Mexico City's halls of power meant their empire was finished. The fragile protection from above shattered forever. The whole operation has been discovered. They cannot expose the CIA and they cannot expose their sponsor. That means only one thing. Camarena's murder prompted an unprecedented response from the DEA. In March 1985, Operation Leyenda was launched, the largest homicide investigation in the agency's history. Borders were temporarily tightened, intelligence operations accelerated, and task forces composed of DEA, FBI, and Mexican authorities scoured Guadalajara and surrounding states. The goal was clear: dismantle the cartel leadership responsible for the murder of a U.S. federal agent. The operation produced immediate results. Caro Quintero fled to Costa Rica, but was captured on April 4, 1985. Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo and Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, the other founders of the Guadalajara cartel, were arrested by 1989. The coordinated effort effectively dismantled the original cartel structure, dividing its operations into smaller factions that later became the Sinaloa, Tijuana, and Juarez cartels. Yet even as these leaders fell, evidence began surfacing that suggested a deeper, hidden orchestration behind the abduction and murder. Witnesses, later interviewed by Héctor Bareles in 1989, revealed meetings in late 1984 in which high-ranking Mexican officials discussed the kidnapping and monitored operations at the Lope de Vega house itself. At the center of these allegations stood Manuel Bartlett Díaz, Mexico's Secretary of the Interior from 1982 to 1988. As head of the Dirección Federal de Seguridad, DFS, a secret police agency closely linked to the CIA and riddled with corruption, Bartlett controlled intelligence, internal security, and access to state-protected operations. Declassified U.S. documents from 1986 already noted strong suspicions of involvement at his level in narcotics protection. Witnesses claimed he attended planning meetings with Defense Minister Juan Arevalo Gardoqui and Jalisco officials, orchestrating moves that allowed cartel operations to flourish under political cover. Camarena's investigations had brought him too close to Bartlett's network. He had uncovered evidence that cartel shipments were protected by DFS operatives and that drug profits were being funneled to support CIA-backed Contra operations in Nicaragua, bypassing congressional oversight. The presence of Cuban-American CIA operative Félix Rodriguez during parts of the interrogation has been reported by multiple investigative sources, suggesting an intelligence dimension to what initially appeared to be simple cartel retribution. The infamous phone call to Caro Quintero during the torture session allegedly came directly from Bartlett's circle, authorizing a line of action no cartel boss dared cross alone. The first direct attack on a U.S. federal agent marked a historic escalation, but it was sanctioned at the highest levels. Bartlett consistently denied any involvement, dismissing allegations as absurd. No charges were ever filed against him. Yet as the years passed, the narrative persisted. Cartel bosses were not the true architects of Camarena's death. They were executing orders from an untouchable figure in Mexico City's corridors of power. Born February 23, 1936 in Puebla, Bartlett rose quickly through the PRI political machine. His father was a governor. Bartlett himself served as a senator, interior secretary, and later as education secretary from 1988 to 1992. He governed Puebla from 1993 to 1999 and returned to the Senate in 2000 to 2006 and again from 2012 to 2018. In 2018, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador appointed him director of CFE, Mexico's state energy company, a post he held until late 2024. His career survived scandals, allegations of property irregularities, and family business contracts that raised questions about conflicts of interest. Despite decades of investigations, allegations, and international scrutiny, Bartlett remained untouchable. No U.S. court, no Mexican prosecution, and no intelligence intervention could bring him down. Meanwhile, cartel figures rose and fell. Caro Quintero spent 28 years in prison, controversially released in 2013, recaptured in 2022, and extradited to the U.S. in 2025. Ismael El Mayo Zambada, long considered the top drug lord of the Sinaloa cartel, evaded arrest until 2024. All other major cartel leaders either died, were imprisoned, or disappeared. But Bartlett endured. He has never been arrested or questioned, despite holding an office that directly, allegedly allowed the cartels to operate. The Guadalajara cartel's founding empire was never solely the work of criminal genius. Protection from above, DFS badges, turned eyes, political clearance, enabled operations that no single cartel boss could achieve. Camarena's death symbolized the first time a U.S. federal agent was directly targeted, a boundary crossed only with the approval of a puppeteer no agency could touch. 4 decades after February 7, 1985, the truth remains partially buried, much like Camarena and Zavala's remains in Michoacán. Declassified documents, witness testimonies, and tapes continue to surface in U.S. courts. But the full story of who pulled the strings behind the Guadalajara cartel, who sanctioned the murder of Kiki Camarena, and who outlasted every kingpin, remains enshrouded in power, secrecy, and political impunity. The men widely celebrated as the founders of Mexico's modern drug cartels, Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, Rafael Caro Quintero, and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, were, in the late 1970s and early 1980s, young petty criminals from rural Sinaloa with limited resources and no real political influence, essentially small-time thieves and marijuana growers who could have been swiftly arrested by any determined local police force. They lacked the sophistication, capital, or connections to build a multi-billion-dollar transnational empire on their own, relying instead on brute opportunism rather than strategic genius. Their explosive rise to power occurred only because a high-ranking figure in the Mexican government deliberately granted them protection, instructing police, judges, and federal agencies to look the other way, allowing these young criminals to operate freely and transform into untouchable kingpins under the umbrella of official complicity. Before his capture, Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo took steps to fragment the cartel, dividing territories among trusted lieutenants to avoid another massive sweep by law enforcement. This dispersal gave rise to the modern Mexican cartels, Sinaloa, Juárez, Tijuana, and others. Among the emerging leaders, Ismael El Mayo Zambada distinguished himself. Unlike Caro Quintero or Félix Gallardo, El Mayo avoided sensational violence, maintained operational secrecy, and navigated political and law enforcement networks with patience. For decades, he was considered by many observers to be the ultimate boss of bosses. But insiders, including Bartlett, disputed this assumption. El Mayo's freedom and long-term survival, they argued, were a product of political clearance that originated at the highest levels, again pointing toward Bartlett Díaz. While cartel leaders were hunted, arrested, or killed, Bartlett's career continued upward. He survived political scandals, remained embedded in the PRI structure, and managed to navigate Mexico's volatile political terrain with impunity. In April 1990, U.S. agents crossed the border into Mexico to capture Humberto Álvarez Machain, a physician accused of involvement in Camarena's torture. He was transported to El Paso, Texas for trial. The operation sparked outrage in Mexico, raising questions about sovereignty and U.S. authority. Ultimately, Álvarez was acquitted due to insufficient evidence. The episode illustrated the lengths U.S. authorities were willing to go to pursue justice, yet also highlighted limitations. The true orchestrators of Camarena's murder, the political protectors in Mexico City, remained untouched. This reinforced the notion of Bartlett as untouchable. Untouchable not only because of political influence, but because of deep entanglement with intelligence operations during the Cold War. In the mid-1990s, Mexico undertook significant reforms in response to public scrutiny. The Dirección Federal de Seguridad, DFS, implicated in cartel collusion, was dissolved. Intelligence functions were redistributed under newly created agencies, and some officials were prosecuted. Yet Bartlett's circle survived intact. The operational knowledge, networks, and political influence he commanded ensured that while others fell, he remained untouchable. But the full truth remains buried deeper than Camarena and Zavala's graves in Michoacán. Your support is very important. Please like this video and subscribe to get more.